Paul, just a few questions to begin with. Were you personally motivated to get involved in the care industry, or did it happen by chance?
Absolutely not motivated in advance, Laura. It happened by chance. It happened when I was what was called then an articled clerk, a hateful word now, but anyway, I was that, and I was acting towards the end of my period in training for somebody who was buying one of the few nursing homes in central London. We completed that transaction and it went badly wrong because the regulatory aspect, which was pretty thin in those days, but it was all completely wrong and non-existent, even though the fee was £1 to be registered. Imagine that. Anyway, so I had to unscramble all that, so I got to know the ins and outs of the then legislation, which was the Public Health Act of 1936, not changed a great deal, and that led me to become involved. My clients became trade association leads. They asked me to act for the trade association, and it started from there. When if you'd asked me when I was at university if that would be my dream, the answer would have been categorically no. But you have to take and run with what comes, don't you?
I think I found out recently that actually your dream was to be a tax whiz, is that right?
That would have been my dream, and of course that would have been bad news because they're not particularly well thought of anymore. Better off in adult social care, better off with bed knobs and broomsticks.
Well, indeed. And back to care homes. How were care homes perceived in the early days of your career by the service users, the public, and also relevant professionals?
They were very different from the way they are now. There weren't many of them. They were pretty much all publicly run. They were residential care homes, then known as rest homes, were basically hotels for old people who wanted to go and live with other old people. And nursing homes were homes for people who had minor healthcare difficulties, but wanted to live in a nice manor house in the country or something like that. And they were all privately funded, although there was provision under the legislation of 1948 for local authorities to provide that sort of care. They didn't tend to do so. And there was an expectation, because even though the law had changed to say that only married partners and children had responsibilities until the late 1970s, people looked after their old folk. You know, I remember people coming in with a 10-bob note to contribute to Granny's care in the care home, and it went on that way. They were not really understood in the healthcare environment, and they were nice old people, often lampooned in television shows. There was one particular one in which they claimed that they'd take over the care home from the owner. That would not be the case now.
You've worked in the industry now for, I think, over 50 years. What's the single most memorable thing that you've come across?
Well, I think I'm going to say two. Early on when the government started to encourage local authorities to pay for care, there was an explosion in the existence of care homes from about 1978 through to 1985. And the budget, which was then funded through central government, Department of Health and Social Security, something called supplementary benefit. And the local care homes put the prices up about 3 times a year. And the budget for the central government grew until it came to the attention of the then Prime Minister, the famous, infamous, however you like to describe her, Margaret Thatcher, and she said she wasn't having that, so she put a cap on the fees, and that dramatically changed, was probably the moment, and then Mrs. Thatcher moved the liability to local authorities, which was her twin hate, and it became very difficult from then. But to answer your question directly, I think the single biggest thing was the movement to central national regulation from the Care Standards Act 2000, which came into force in 2002. And prior to that, I mean, I had acted for regulators, and I had acted for people who, not people who were residents in care homes, but I'd acted for some authorities and mainly for people who ran care homes. And one got to know the local registration team, and it was good. I mean, even if we didn't act for them, everybody knew them. They dropped in for a cup of tea. There was a very personalised effect, and the local team knew the local provision. And that all suddenly went out of the window, because all those established teams, maybe in a health authority, maybe 4 or 5 people maximum, suddenly became a national body, and that changed everything completely. And, I think if I had my wish, maybe you'll ask me that at the end, I'd like to go back to see localised and dedicated teams where there were real individual relationships between inspectors and providers. I think it worked better. And I think people got on, everybody knew where they were.